Hey folks, and welcome to Mind Litter's 20 Weird Things You May Not Know About Steven Spielberg's first film, the 1971 thriller Duel. Number 1. Duel did not begin as a clever Hollywood pitch. It began as a real gut-level scare on an American roadway on the same day the country was reeling from the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. While everything around him felt shaken and unreal that day, Richard Matheson found himself trapped in a very different kind of shock on his way home from the office, with a large semi-truck bearing down on him in a way that felt personal, aggressive, and impossible to explain. It was not a dramatic stunt. It was that raw, stomach-tightening moment anyone who has been aggressively tailgated by a much larger vehicle knows when the world narrows to mirrors, tires, and the fear that the massive bulk of metal behind you has decided you are the target. That single encounter lodged itself in his mind as more than road rage. It felt like being chosen, and that feeling became the spark that eventually ignited Duel. Number 2. Probably the most random event that turned the real fear of the writer's story into a film at all was that Spielberg did not stumble across Matheson's short story through some formal studio pipeline. He found out about it simply because his secretary delivered a Playboy issue to him, the April 1971 issue specifically, and pointed to the unique story inside. The interesting short story was sitting there in print, and that single casual handoff became the hinge that swung the whole project into existence, like fate using the simplest delivery method imaginable. One person notices something that stands out to them, one magazine changes hands, one young director gets his shot, and the result is a movie that still feels like it is breathing down your neck every time the truck appears on screen. Number 3. Spielberg could have done what most films did back then and made the Highway Danger Studio stage by keeping the driving work on controlled sets and leaning on rear projection and such. Instead, however, he pushed for the more difficult and risky path, real roads, real distance, and real variables he could not tame. That decision made the project instantly more complicated because every mile outside a studio adds time pressure, safety concerns, and 100 tiny chances for a day to fall apart in any number of horrible ways. Universal was nervous for this project for a reason. Location work can burn a schedule and budget to ash fast. Spielberg's way through that resistance was simple. He asked for a short proving window, a trial run where he could demonstrate speed, control, and efficiency while still achieving the intense chase feel he wanted. If he could not keep the machine moving, the whole plan would have collapsed back into safer, flatter techniques, and the movie would have lost the gritty authenticity that made it such a standout film. Number 4. The whole film was created at a pace that sounds reckless itself until you remember the project's constraints. Spielberg was working with a shoestring budget around $450,000, and the planned schedule was only 10 shooting days. He went over, finishing in 13 days, which is still under 2 weeks to capture a chase-driven story that originally ran about 74 minutes for television initially. Principal photography wrapped on October 4th, 1971, and the film premiered on November 13th, which meant post-production had just under 6 weeks to cut it, shape the suspense, lock sound, and deliver a broadcast-ready masterpiece. That kind of timeline does not allow second-guessing, it forces clarity, it rewards bold decisions, and it punishes hesitation. The result is a film that feels tight because it had to be. Every moment is there because it earned its place. Number 5. Spielberg did something that seems more like plotting a military operation than prepping a made-for-television thriller. He turned his motel room into a full-on navigation plan. Instead of drawing neat little frames the way storyboards are normally done, he went wide and geographic, covering all 4 walls with a huge aerial map of the film's driving terrain, then drawing the route David Mann would travel and marking exactly where each story beat would strike. The odd brilliance of it is that it treats the movie like a physical journey first and a sequence of shots second, which is perfect for a story that lives and dies on its momentum, spacing, and the feeling that the road keeps unspooling no matter how badly you want it to end. Number 6. Spielberg had a very specific picture of the character David Mann in his head and the actor he wanted to play it, and it did not come from casting lists or studio meetings. It came from a performance he once saw and couldn't forget. He had watched Dennis Weaver play a jittery motel night manager in the 1958 film Touch of Evil, directed by Orson Welles, and he saw something useful there, frayed nerves that felt honest, a kind of controlled panic that reads like a real person trying not to fall apart. That was exactly the energy this role required, because Mann is not a tough guy expected to handle confrontation well. He is a regular working man having an awful day that gets progressively worse as it goes. The problem was that the studio did not instantly share the same opinion, and Universal Pictures hesitated. Spielberg did not shrug and move on. He pushed, argued the case, and kept at it until they finally gave in. Number 7. With the strict production constraints, there was no luxury of leaning on process shots or endless stunt doubles, so Dennis Weaver himself drove the Plymouth Valiant in most of the driving footage and logged over 2,000 miles across the entirety of the shoot. He also took on stunts that most actors would prefer to be handed off to actual stuntmen, including the phone booth sequence where the truck slams it and Mann has to bail out at exactly the right instant. That moment was done in a single take, which meant the danger was not theoretical. The timing had to be right the first time, and it was the kind of practical high-stakes execution that puts a real jolt into the scene because everyone on set knows it is a big risk. He walked away uninjured, the shot landed, and the movie gained one of its most memorable bursts of pure physical panic. Number 8. Spielberg treated the Peterbilt truck itself as if it were a co-star rather than a prop, and that meant he didn't merely grab whatever big rig was available and call it a day. Universal Pictures brought in a lineup of assorted trucks for him to inspect the way a casting director lines up actors, and he chose the burly 1955 Peterbilt 281 tanker because it looked like it could glare with menace. The old round headlights and that split windshield looked a bit like a face, something you could read emotion into, and it was far more unsettling than a clean modern flat front truck. Even before any extra dressing, the rust, grime, and battered tanker presence made it feel like a machine with a temper, the kind of thing you do not want in your rear mirrors when the road is empty and you are alone. Number 9. Once the rig was chosen, the crew added some extra touches to help turn it into a predator with a backstory you can feel without a single line of dialogue explaining it. They nicknamed it the Beast on set, then deliberately uglified it until it looked seasoned by miles and cruelty. They worked additional oil and dirt onto the paint and rust, as well as smeared dead insects across the grille daily to give the impression that the truck was always on the move. The most chilling touch was the additions to the front bumper, where multiple old license plates from different states were added as a quiet hint that this was not its first hunt, and that the murderous driver might be collecting souvenirs from roads far beyond this one. It is a small visual suggestion, but it changes the whole feeling of the chase because it makes you think you're not watching a random act of road rage, but a sadistic killer's daily routine. Number 10. When the film's runtime had to be expanded to hit a full feature-length 90 minutes, production needed additional vehicle coverage since they had already destroyed the original truck along with a few cars, which meant using additional red Plymouth Valiants and another Peterbilt truck detailed up to match the originals to maintain continuity and keep the shoot for the added scenes moving. The backup Peterbilt, which was fortunately already prepared as a potential stand-in for the primary truck if needed during the initial production, a 1960 model, was used for the added scenes to extend the film's length. That particular Peterbilt was lucky enough to not get sacrificed for the production, and today it is the only surviving screen-used Duel movie truck still in existence. Number 11. Duel's eventual switch from a square, tighter frame TV screen ratio to a widescreen theatrical presentation ended up revealing some small filming goofs that weren't caught during the rushed production of the film. Shots that were composed to keep everything clean inside a narrower box suddenly expose errors of the camera work just outside the intended picture, such as reflections, shadows, and edges that were never meant to be seen in the shots. That is how you get the most noticeable goof up in the final version of the film. A brief glimpse of Spielberg and another camera person here reflected back in the phone booth glass while David Mann is desperately trying to reach help. The tension is still there, but audiences can spot the extra layer of behind-the-scenes exposure, pulling the production curtain back, if only even for a brief moment. Number 12. For the especially predatory extra low-angle highway shots, Spielberg reached outside a normal TV movie toolkit and borrowed a purpose-built, Corvette engine-powered camera car that had already proven itself able to capture the sense of speed and danger in a car chase for the 1968 Steve McQueen film, Bullet. Instead of filming from a more safe, upright, normal car ride height, the custom-built rig let the lens ride extremely close to the pavement, down around 6 inches off the ground in fact, so the road rushes past like a saw blade and every closing speed feels more intense than it should at normal driving speed, because the camera is not just observing the danger, it is down in it, practically skimming the asphalt, turning a simple lane change into a thrill. and Spielberg did not forget that trick once the movie wrapped. The same bullet camera car setup would later be used again when he was making the 1974 film The Sugarland Express, with camera car specialist Pat Hustis at the wheel, putting that low-slung platform perspective back to work for another Spielberg road story. Number 13. In Richard Matheson's original short story, the trucker is given one small bit of humanity, a name, which is Keller, a dark little wink that gets turned into killer the second your brain says it out loud. That single choice changes the flavor of the threat because a name implies a person somewhere behind the wheel, a man with a past, a temper, maybe even a sadistic reason, however warped it may be. But the film strips that away on purpose, and it is a ruthless upgrade. Without a name, the pursuit stops feeling like a feud with a specific driver and starts feeling like the road itself has decided to punish you. There is no identity to pin down, no handle to grab, no way to turn the nightmare into something explainable despite David Mann's attempts to reason it out to himself and others throughout the story. It intentionally just stays raw, immediate, and personal, like being hunted by pure evil and machinery rather than by a man. Number 14. The fake Grebleips company car is one of those odd little details that feels like it slipped into Duel through a crack in the tension, and it's an easy-to-miss Easter egg in plain sight, mainly because the movie doesn't slow down much to show it long. But in the sequence where Mann catches sight of a parked black-and-white sedan and his brain jumps to the most comforting possibility, it's a patrol car. The camera gives you just enough time to read the door and realize the truth. It's just an insect extermination company car. The lettering says Grebleips, and once you notice it and think about it for a second, the joke clicks. It's just Spielberg spelled backwards, a quiet signature by Steven. What makes it such a perfect Easter egg is how it lives inside the story's emotional whiplash. Mann's brief flicker of hope turns into continued frustration immediately as the reality reasserts itself and the audience gets a sly extra beat layered on top, a director winking at you while the nightmare keeps rolling. It's not a flashy cameo or a self-congratulatory flourish. It's a small, almost mischievous stamp that rewards attentive eyes, and it lands even better because it appears at a sneaky moment when every viewer is desperately scanning the frame for salvation. Number 15. The villain driver is never truly shown to the viewer or even the Mann character himself. The film keeps him anonymous, revealing only fleeting fragments, an arm that signals, boots that hit the ground, a gesture that carries attitude without revealing a face. It is a cruel kind of restraint because it forces you to stare at the machine as if it is the mind and the mind as if it is the machine. However, behind that faceless menace, the physical performance is real, of course, and it belongs largely to the legendary stuntman, Carey Lofton, the veteran who handled the truck's driving and the brief human actions that the film allows. Lofton was not a random wheelman. He was already a heavyweight in the stunt driving world, with major work connected to Bullet, Vanishing Point, and the French Connection. The kind of credits that mean you understand how to make a vehicle feel predatory instead of merely fast. He took the role seriously enough to ask Spielberg what the trucker's motivation should be, and he gave him a blunt answer. "You're a dirty, rotten, no-good son of a bitch." Lofton shot right back, "Kid, you hired the right man." And that is exactly what you feel in the finished chase, not theatrical villainy, but a cold practice bully who knows how to menace without ever showing his face and has yet to face any real consequences. Number 16. What really stung Spielberg about Duel's success was that it also taught him a brutal lesson in dealing with Hollywood studios. If you do not control your material strictly, someone else can treat your work like a parts bin. Universal Pictures quietly recycled some of Duel's chase material inside the Incredible Hulk TV show, specifically the Season 1 episode titled Never Give a Trucker an Even Break, which aired April 28, 1978. Instead of treating the footage like a finished work with its own timing and intent, the studio treated it like usable action coverage, lifted and stitched into someone else's story, which meant Spielberg's suspense beats were suddenly serving a different tone, a different edit, and a different production identity. The part that enraged him was not just the reuse itself, it was the feeling of being blindsided, like his earliest signature work could be repackaged at will because the ownership lived elsewhere. That experience hardened how he handled control from then on, and once he had real leverage later in his career, he pushed to lock down protection so his footage could not be repurposed into other projects without his say-so, a behind-the-scenes power shift that traces back to that one trucker episode. Number 17. One of the weirdest little footnotes in Duel's history is that it somehow escaped the highway and ended up on a tabletop, Because yes, there was actually an official Duel board game released by Parker Brothers in the early 70s. The idea is so odd it almost sounds like a bad joke, taking a tight, nerve-wracking chase film where the entire thrill is derived from sound, speed, and looming metal, then try to bottle that feeling into cardboard, dice, and printed rules. Quite an odd concept from the get-go. Take a terrifying cat-and-mouse popular thriller film and turn it into a family game night. Sure, that'll work. Predictably, it did not exactly light the world on fire, because you simply can't recreate the sensation of a giant truck filling your mirror when you're rolling numbers on a dining room table. It sold like a lead balloon, vanished fast, and that failure is exactly what makes it bizarre as well as fascinating today, because the few surviving copies have become essentially an artifact of the era, a piece of memorabilia that feels like it came from an alternate universe where every hit thriller automatically became a board game. If you ever stumble on one in the wild, it's less like finding a game and more like finding a cultural fossil, proof that someone once believed Duel's terror could be shuffled, dealt, and played on a stationary piece of cardboard. Number 18. The driving off the cliff finale was one of those brutal, no-second chance stunts where the movie literally destroys its own monster, so Spielberg treated the moment like a once-in-a-lifetime event and ringed it with 7 cameras to catch the plunge from as many usable angles as possible. The plan hinged on getting that massive tanker committed to the run, then letting it continue on without a driver, but that turned out to be easier said than done, so Lofton had to drive it to build momentum first instead, and then jerry-rigged it in a way to keep it pulling. Then the unexpected part happened. The rig setup failed during the actual take, forcing Lofton to stay with the truck far longer than he had intended, riding it hard toward the point of no return, guiding tons of steel until he was almost out of runway, then bailing out at the last possible instant as it went over. That is why the driver's door is hanging open as it tumbles into the canyon. It should be noted that, as per Spielberg himself, the open door was not intentional, not meant as a spooky story clue that the driver escaped or anything. It's simply the visible footprint of a stuntman escape that had to happen because of the complication. The driverless plan instead turned into a split-second survival decision forever immortalized by many cameras catching the action. Number 19. There was a tense moment in Duel's pre-production history between the more traditional studio folks' instinct and a young director Spielberg's vision for the film's climax, who already knew exactly what kind of fear he was building and how to conclude it. Universal's pressure was the predictable kind. A gasoline tanker goes off a cliff. Audiences expect a giant fireball explosion, so just give them the boom spectacle and wrap it up with a bang. Spielberg saw the trap in that instantly. Sure, an explosion is clean, fast, and strangely comforting because it ends the threat in a single bright punctuation mark. However, Spielberg required the opposite. He insisted that the truck die the way it had lived in the film, as a heavy, stubborn, grinding presence, collapsing with weight and noise and a sense of finality that feels earned rather than flashy. The ending he fought for is mechanical and lingering, metal twisting and finally settling, the monster finally running out of motion in a way that keeps the tension in your chest for an extra beat instead of releasing it in one fiery burst. And he didn't negotiate softly. He drew a line, making it clear that if they insisted on a big explosive rewrite, they would have to bring in another director to do it, because he wasn't going to betray the logic of the movie just to satisfy a standard expectation. Number 20. At the very tail end of the truck's demise, Spielberg added something primal that makes the truck feel less like a vehicle and more like a wounded animal. He lets it die with a sound that belongs to monsters, not machines. When the wrecked tanker finally begins to settle after its drop, you hear that long, unsettling groan, and it is not just metal destruction. It was built from a studio-created creature sound effect based on the 1954 film Creature from the Black Lagoon, a sound designed to make audiences think of something alive, something animalistic, something that can suffer. That single audio choice changes how the moment lands, because the chase has already trained you to treat the truck like a predator, and what is essentially its last breath confirms it. You are not just watching a mechanical collision, you are hearing a beast lose its last bit of strength. Even more intriguing, Spielberg liked that death rattle sound effect enough to bring it back later in Jaws, reusing the same monster-flavored groan as a kind of signature punctuation, as if he'd found the perfect sound for a massive killer beast finally perishing. Well, there you have it, folks. Thanks for watching, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you saw here. You guys are all great. See you next time.